My dudes, let's get over to the main camera first. Welcome back. Hopefully you guys can see me and hear me. It's been a minute since we've done a stream. See if we can get some people in here. We were trying to do a multi-stream, but it looks like I have to set up a few other things to get that working correctly across the board when it comes to different the multi-streams setup. So Streamlabs needs a little bit of configuration for me to be able to stream live on X and on Twitch. But we are live. Welcome, my dudes. It's been a minute. We got a lot to cover today. We're going to peel back the networking aspects when it comes to Bitcoin mining. But this is a general networking. So if you're just finding this video and you don't do anything with Bitcoin mining or you plan nothing to do with it, this is actually a really good video for you. Also, if you have a heavy amount of clients that are going to be on an Ubiquiti network. So this is really targeted for a 256 plus network environment, network segmentation type of situation where you need to have multiple VLANs that cover multiple IP ranges. And you may have multiple buildings. This will apply for all of this. We're going to deep dive into the Wi-Fi aspects of it, setting up different, privileged networks on that, setting up, if you have camera segmentation that you want to have, set up in it. We're going to cover that, the power over Ethernet, all the fun things when it comes to the networking aspect, because there's a lot of videos on Bitcoin mining. I'm going to switch back onto Bitcoin mining, from configuration management and all that of the clients themselves. But what eats people's lunch is when you start to put together a much larger operation, or let's say you're going to do some co-hosting for somebody and you're trying to segment the network out, or you're running into some kind of issues on the network side. And it comes down to you just try to buy an appliance, throw it in there, keep default configs, do a few other things, and then you end up having some issues with it. And you're like, what is going on here with this particular network appliance? And, you're trying to get it figured out. And we've learned a lot of lessons when we've set up these networks, and what we're going to be sharing with you guys is, going from smaller operations that were under 200 plus clients to going to one with 400 plus clients to 1,500 clients to over 6,000 clients on one network, right? So when I'm saying a client, I'm saying an individual device that could be from a phone to a piece of network equipment to an ASIC miner, if we're talking Bitcoin mining, to all of those different things, anything asking for an address and trying to get access to the internet. So that is what we're talking about. Before I dive right into it, I want to get a sound check from everybody. Everybody's good here. This video is going to be out there. I haven't really shared too much of it. I'm going to make sure that folks can see it out there on YouTube, out there on Twitter, or X, as I should say. We are live now, my dudes. All right, post. All right, so it's out there. Let's dive into it. So what we're going to go through right now is we're going to go through the major components. And in the description below, we have all the links to these items. So like everything I'm covering today are below. I also have a document that kind of highlights an annotated outline of the major components that we're going to talk through. So if there's something I'm saying and you're like, man, I don't know what the hell this guy's saying, we have an example of that out there. I break down what the difference between routing and gateways are and all that kind of stuff too. So that's all in the description below in this video. And you can click that and then click on the components and see what each of these different components that we're going to talk through. So that helps you kind of get an idea of what you're dealing with there. So let's get into the various components of a build. And I'm going to set the scenario for you. So we're going to call this kind of like, I would call it almost a mission thread. Like what am I looking at to try to accomplish here? So if I had a 220-foot container situation, and we're actually going to use the whiteboard here and kind of break this use case down for you guys real quick. So let's switch over to the smart board real quick. And we're going to lay the scenario out here of a 2 times 20-foot container build. So this is 210 units per box. So that's 420 on a total Bitcoin miners in this build out. So that is the scope that we're talking about right now on this. And I'm going to get to breaking down each component that you're looking at here. And some of this stuff is pretty decently priced. You know, if we're talking this Dream Machine first, this is your router. So like if you have a router at home and it's like an ASUS unit or a smaller router, even one of the Ubiquiti cloud gateways, and the Cloud Gateway Ultra, which I have here. This is what I have set up here. We don't have an actual extra Dream Machine. We've deployed them all that we have. I'm waiting for a Dream Machine Pro Max to come in, and we can do an update or a specific video on the Max, separate settings in a different video. But this setup here, there's two things that you got to kind of remember with Ubiquiti. So on a Dream Machine that cost roughly about $399. And that is effectively your router. Now, the difference between most routers in general versus like Ubiquiti stuff is when you're getting something like this, you're just getting your routing services and you get a space to put a hard drive in to where you can have like the protect options where if you want to hook up cameras to it, it can actually run cameras too. But it does not have power over Ethernet stock on the base Dream Machine, and it doesn't have internet or Wi-Fi. So you have to, pick up a separate Wi-Fi device that you can plug into that. And we're going to get into this of how that works. So effectively what you're getting on that guy is an entire operating system that is really designed around, a network layout. And that is effectively what would be considered on the enterprise side like a software-defined network, so SDN. So you can create a lot of unique characteristics of an SDN inside of this. Now, it's not fully virtualized. You can't create separate appliances, but there's a lot of configuration management within that. So as we start to go through kind of some of the components to this, you can start to see how this kind of builds together and gives you kind of this telemetry on, the routing and all the things that come with Ubiquiti's OS. And mind you, I've had friends that actually have used other pieces of equipment and just downloaded the Ubiquiti OS on essentially an SDK that they can put onto like a Raspberry Pi and just run Ubiquiti's OS on some, non-standard equipment. There's other things that you can do with it. So in this case, we're talking about the actual hardware that you get there. And in this case, we're going to talk about having a $399 piece of equipment right here, which is the Dream Machine Pro, which kind of is the brain of everything. And the way we're going to be hitting that, hitting that up with, or linking that up with the other hardware is we're going to create some network segmentation because essentially we have two boxes. And the idea here is that you have an ability to expand. So let's say you get to a site, it has maybe 1.5 megawatts of power. You have two 20-foot containers using about 750,000 watts each. So that's 1,500 kVA. But let's say that site can be upgraded in a later time to 5 megawatts. And this is a lot of the current situations we have here, the builds you guys have seen us build out here in Illinois, where we have a 5 megawatt max per client or customer, and our minimum barrier to entry is that 750 kVA to 1.5 megawatt. It's a good way to crawl, walk, run your build. You start small, get that understanding of how things work, and then go ahead and commit the capital to do a 5 megawatt build. But this architecture that we're going to be talking about allows you to inherit that expansion. So you're making that upfront investment of putting together a clean network setup, and then you can kind of ramp up your build from this. So in this setup here, and I'm going to switch over to the whiteboard, and we're going to walk the proverbial dog through this whole thing, and then we'll go to the visualization on the actual OS itself. I'm going to switch over to a screen that will take you through everything that we're going to walk through here. So in this Dream Machine Pro, you're going to have an SFP plus fiber connection that you're going to connect from here over to this aggregator. And this will be a port 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to show you guys how this looks on the back end of this once I'm done connecting this. So this is your fiber line. I'm actually going to take this. I'm going to change the color here because we're going to have a lot of different lines here, and we want to make sure we know what these lines are. So we're going to change the color here. We're going to make this color. That color from now on is going to be known as our fiber color. So we're going to go here, to here. And then from a power line, I'm going to show you a power line color here because we're going to connect power from the PDU Pro here. We're going to go into this guy here. So this is powered into this device, and I'll show you guys the inside of that device when we bring up the software here, because it gives me an ability to restart and remotely the power to this device here. And then we're going to go from there, and then on the fiber here, we're just going to continue our fiber lines down, and I'm going to explain why this is all relevant. We're going to have port 2 come over to this connection here, which is going to be the 24 port switch. And then I'm going to show you how the miners get plugged in a second. We're going to duplicate this switch here. We're going to duplicate because we have 2 containers. So we're going to have 2 of these guys. We're going to say this one's container 1. We're going to change this black back to black. We're going to say this is container 1, and this is container 2. There, it's going to come up here. Container 2. Back to blue. And we're going to go this one over to here. Boop. Right there. So these would normally be, you'll use, we use quarter. There's a 3/4 PVC between the containers. We bury that, and then that fiber line, you can get the 30 meter. So this would be a 30 meter connection from point to point. You can get that right from Ubiquiti. Again, links down below. And you can take that straight over to that machine. So essentially you get about a little over 90 feet here, or right at 90 feet for that. And then on the network wireless support, let's just put that one here, this color. We're going to have this port over here to Wi-Fi. We'll have at least one Wi-Fi adapter there. And then I'm going to put the security green cameras here and here. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to set up a whole bunch under this container. Let's go back to this. I'm just going to draw them out. On a typical 20-foot container of Bitcoin mining, you'll have essentially 3 towers. And in this, you might have 8 racks or 7 racks of machines. And what we're doing here is you're going to have a couple options here. The cheaper of the options is, especially if you're buying an existing container that has an existing set of, like, let's say 16 or 24 port switches in it, it's going to have switches on every other spot. So I'm actually going to remove that one, delete. You're going to have sometimes up to 3 switches per setup here, because you're going to have a total, depending on the build setup here, you could have anywhere from, if this is 210, you're going to have close to 60 or 70 machines in each of these. Let's just call it 70, 70, 70 here. And so you'll have enough connections going to each of your ASICs, right, from these ports here on the switch. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to label this one. What color do we have left? We'll go yellow, because that's a typical network cable. We're going to go on port 24 here on this one, and we're going to connect it here, and then this one's going to go into this one, and you can see the kind of pattern here. And why this is relevant is we have telemetry. We understand what this is. We know that port 1 here is going to be labeled for switch 1, and switch 1's probably got this shelf and this shelf, and this is going to come relevant later. So this gives us an ability to use the existing hardware that's inside the containers, those kind of basic switches that are unmanaged, and we're going to set up various VLANs on each of those, and we're going to control the range that's going to each of those too, the range of IPs. And I'm going to show some tricks for you on a network segmentation and prioritization between these switches. Because when you get a much larger setup here, let's just say these 2 here in general, and I'm going to clone this whole thing here. Let me do a Let's take this whole little guy here. Oop, no, I don't want to move it. We're going to duplicate this guy here. Duplicate, move it over. Let's just call this that box too, right? So this setup here allows us to layer the network into two different kind of sub areas. So we know container 1 and container 2, and each of these will have a series of VLANs that reference that. And this is all going to make sense here in a second when I actually bring up the OS for you guys, but I'm going to show you kind of how each of these are connected here from a power standpoint. And then you could have a longer connection or have another one of these for container 2. It's really the minimum, the MVP here, which is the minimally viable product here, is that you have at least one of these because you want to be able to restart. And let me bring up the network here because I forgot the Starlink here, which is very important. Let's get a purple. Oh, they have purple here. So your Starlink is plugged in here to primary, and your backup here is going to be plugged into port 1, and you can actually set this to WAN 2. So you can, on the Ubiquiti things, have 2, and you can set these modes between these as a shared connection, which you don't want to do. You want to have this as failover. If you want redundancy on your network, like if something happens to Starlink, which is very strong, but sometimes it goes down briefly, you have a backup on an LTE. That's a cheap, you can get a cheap plan, low cost, hotspot, put 10 gig on it and just have this as a failover on WAN 2. It's a cheap, it's like how much cost if you have a site down because Starlink's down for a second or something happens, you have a backup. It's good to have a failover. If you're going to spend, let's say $1 million on a setup like this with all the ASICs and the containers and stuff, and you're relying on one internet connection, you're just relying on this one guy here, like for a small nominal cost, it probably makes sense to have a second failover there. So you can actually have that connected there. So these power setups here, the reason why this is relevant is this, let me delete this. Delete, because this is going to be USB-C to some adapter probably to this one, because this has USB-C on it too for power standpoint, which is pretty nice. This is essentially our network connection configuration, and I'm going to switch over to the camera and then kind of talk through kind of the setup here. So that's kind of the wire diagram here too. Now you could go. Let's talk about kind of the topography here. If you want full telemetry of what's going on at an ASIC level, then you're going to want to replace all those switches. Now, I'm going to tell you, with working with many clients, like you can spec it out. We spec it out all the time to replace all those, and most people look at it and go, do I need it? And I like categorizing all of our builds with like, this is a must have and this is a nice to have. Nice to have would give me at least down to which machine is having a particular issue, or if it's, that network switches down, I can see the light literally on the Ubiquiti software that, hey, that's dead, the control board's dead, the power supply's down. I know I have gaps. Now, there is site managers and all that kind of stuff in some of the tools, like you're using Foreman, you can have a site manager and you can kind of see that same kind of grid-based setup because you're going out there using the IP reporter to tell things are at. But in this setup, you're doing it from a network level. So you can actually see, each machine. If you're in this config, though, where you're using unmanaged switches and we're just using VLANs on the 24-port switches, again, to keep costs down, you could use 48 ports if you have more towers, but using a single 24-port switch, PoE being that you're being able to power some of these IoT devices like your cameras and your Wi-Fi, it allows you to manage that a little differently. And then the PDU Pro here, and you'll see it once we log in, allows you to power recycle. So if you're gone, and let's say you have a control plane, like a mini computer, a mini PC sitting here, which you would have, like, let's just put it here. Well, I don't want to use red because that's going to confuse. Delete. We're gonna make this one brown or something before I switch. Let's go here and this color here. There we go. Delete that. So this is your management computer, manage PC, and that might be just a little microcomputer. This little guy can also be connected into here, and if you're gone and you can't get to your box real quick, you can just power recycle by controlling that inside the Ubiquiti OS. You can just say reboot it. You know, you can kill the power and restart it, and as long as that is wake on, a power restart, you can have it set that way. You could have it wake on LAN set up with a network, that kind of thing. So you want that to where you have the ability to restart or repower cycle any of the hardware that's in this stack here. This isn't going to repowering any kind of like ASICs or anything. This is your 110 connections, your 110 volt connections for that kind of stuff. But this kind of setup here gives you a very managed approach in maintaining your operations. And that's the kind of config setup that we have. And I'm now going to switch over real quick to a screen and show you guys how to go in there and configure this stuff. Because there's one thing about like buying the hardware and plugging it all in and going, sweet, I got it. But then you got some potential issues, and you want to be able to manage kind of what's going on from a network traffic standpoint. And it really is relevant, especially when you start getting in over about 1,000 clients. We saw a lot of issues on the Dream Machine once you start punching past 1,000 clients. It's just really heavy on it. And it's not that there's a lot of traffic as much as there's a lot of noise on like a Bitcoin network when they're fetching work, and then all of them are trying to get up, get an IP and all that kind of stuff. So, having 10 gig between all the switches and stuff, that's really nice. Like our location out in North Carolina, it was set up for 6,000 machines, and essentially we had the Pro aggregator, which I think I deleted the aggregator earlier, which is unfortunate. The aggregator went away, my dudes. But we had the Pro aggregator, which was 16 port, and then essentially we had all of these 48 port at the bottom part that went to all the different larger towers, because we're talking 6,000 machines. So you'd have almost 900 machines per tower, and there was an A and a B side. So when we get in here and I start talking about a tower being a section of machines, and then in like an IT world, an enterprise world, it could be a floor, right? Just think of these synonymously, right? Like if you have a floor and it has X amount of clients, or if in a Bitcoin world, you have amount of machines that are inside of a particular zone, that zone, you want to narrow down to your different VLANs. So you know where things are at and how things are working. And when you start getting over 1,000 plus clients, you start running into like network segmentation priority issues. And it'll start to run to a crawl, or your Ubiquiti stuff will freeze up. And it's nothing wrong with the Ubiquiti. It's purely on the network configuration, and we're going to get into that. So let's switch over real quick. Hopefully this is good for you guys. This is a lot of stuff we already kind of do, and it's kind of, you don't get to see a lot of this. And I think it's important to bring some of this stuff to you guys. So hopefully this is pretty good for you guys. So what we have here is not a Dream Machine, but it's a small little Ubiquiti Cloud Gateway Pro. The Ultra is the exact one, and you can have it down below. I have links to it down there. But the bottom line is it does run the Ubiquiti OS. The difference is it doesn't have the SFP Plus, which is the fiber connection. And I don't have the aggregator in this mix right now, but just because we're talking like it's on my table right now. So I'm going to bring this up to show a network topography. So when you come in, you end up getting this display. If you've never seen Ubiquiti's display, it's pretty sweet. It shows you most active clients, what's going on here. I have it right now connected to Starlink. That's sitting outside our shop right now, just running right out the front door. We're going to do a quick download test just to see what we're getting here on Starlink. And I literally just threw it out the door. I don't even know if it's optimally set up right now, but you can see, yeah, the upload's trash right now. It's probably, I bet you Starlink's probably sending me a message yelling at me that the connection, actually, you know what, thinking about it, the way I have it pointed, it's probably pointed right at my building. But typically the Starlink's anywhere around 200 megabit to 150 megabit and about 30 to 40 up is typically what it is when it's actually positioned correctly and pick up a lot of satellites. But that does give you kind of a network, test right there built into the front dashboard there. And then this topography shows you kind of the layout. So it shows you if we had both internet connections connected, the LTE, we would see another one floating out here ahead of the router. And then if you click on any of these, you get to see kind of what the setup here is. So you get to see what's plugged in, what speed it is, and those sorts of things. So you can see MAC address, all these important relevant items. Then you got a different view here with a port view. So you can go into a port view on any of these, which just slides you down to this little guy here. But like, I'll come over here and show you kind of the way we have it set up here. Right now, we have essentially the PDU Pro. I can see how much wattage is it using right now with all these devices plugged in. We're using 109 watts currently out of the 1875, which is essentially the top of your 20 amp circuit. That it can supply, and it's showing kind of real-time power analysis on the stuff plugged into the network. So that's always kind of nice here. And then you have your different outlets here that you can go in and label. So you got your USB-Cs here that you can come in here and just change the names and labels on them. You can see at a power level of each outlet what it's drawing. So I can come into here, I can come in here and name this outlet, which is pretty nice. I can power recycle it real quick or do a manual recycle on it. So this is where you come in there and change it. And if you had this labeled like, hey, this is the router, I want to reboot it, you could just do a quick power recycle. So it just blips it, or you can just do a manual, hey, give it a second, let it shut down. It shows you your power factor, it shows your voltage, those kind of numbers on that device here, this PDU Pro. So this is essentially a virtual layout of the way it's set up. And you can see, on these different times. And you can see if you've had, like how many cycles have it had, how many times you've rebooted it. And then there's some different options here where you can go in there and name stuff here. You can provide some more detail. You can locate it, all those kind of things in your network rack. Now we're going to go over here and see this 24 port switch. And essentially on this one, we're setting up where you can see right now what we have currently plugged in here. You can go into port manager, which shows you kind of a layout here. And it will give a kind of a floater of like what's plugged into it. In this case, the feeder from the Gateway Ultra, so it's the router, is plugged into port 24, and it's effectively feeding network to this entire switch. And then I have another mini powered switch that I just threw on there as an extra one. This is one of the smaller Ultra 210 watt, so it's a small little 8-port switch. You can see here with the 8 ports here. And if I left this to where we can do an update on it, that way you can see what's going on here. But you can see that this switch itself, power over Ethernet, has 200 potential watts of availability. It has one Wi-Fi 7 adapter plugged into it right now. So you can see here, I got the let's see here, I got the laptop. No, I only have this is the feeder that comes from the 24 port switch to give it internet. And then this one is the Wi-Fi adapter. You can see down there in the downlink, if I click on this, I could say to proceed to power cycle it, hit no. I can go into the details here. You can see some more stuff around it. So in this particular port, if I click it at a port level, I can name this and just name this where the Wi-Fi is, adapter is plugged into. Now it's all set up currently on the default network. We're going to get in here and set up these different VLANs, and I'm going to explain that here in a second. But right now it's set to default, which is the normal 192.168.1.0 base class, I believe C, basic network layout. We're going to go in there and change this particular thing to take advantage of the Wi-Fi public network. But before I do that, I'm going to go in there and show you guys how that's set up. And you can then classify it. And then you have a very clean organized network. You know where everything's at. You know everything's getting the correct VLANs, all that sort of stuff. So if we go back to the topography here, and we can pull this down, the laptop's plugged into the 24-port switch, and then you can see kind of this layout. Now, I'll switch back real quick to smartboard. You would see on a much larger setup, a much more detailed layout here. And as we go into a more deep dive, this is a very top level review today. I'm going to get in there and show you guys some VLAN setup, show you some prioritization, and then we're going to take some question and answer on this video. But if you guys like this series, we'll get in a little deeper. We'll be able to bring up one of the larger sites. You can see the network configuration, how it works when you have multiple clients on, let's say, the unmanaged switches, how that looks inside the network view. You'll see a total client count, but you're going to see only how many on your VLAN, each VLAN. And then you can see a much more all the way down to a switch level version of that, where we have actual machines. Our test bench is a perfect example. I can have up to 12 machines hooked up to that test bench right now. We have a spot for 8 on the bench, and then we have some other side slots with other boxes that we've created, the 30 amp boxes, to be able to have some more machines running. But we can run 12 machines simultaneously, and then you can see at a machine level quickly to be able to remote into it and all that kind of stuff. So it does. This OS really simplifies a lot of this network layer really simplifies a lot of the troubleshooting process in a Bitcoin mine using this Ubiquiti stuff. And again, for the folks that have just joined, you can look down in the description for any of those components that we're talking about. They're all down there, and a typical setup that we have. So let's get back into the laptop view real quick and take you guys through some of the configuration of this device here. So as we go in and look into, let's go back up to the dashboard so we know where our landing zone is at, right? And then what you could end up doing is coming into this little settings tab down here. And we're going to go very first into networks here. So I've already kind of set up a couple here just to kind of lay out the setup and make sure that this gateway altar was working a lot like the other devices, which it does, which allows me to set up various VLANs. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new virtual network. And don't worry, I'm going to go back to the whiteboard, and I'm going to walk you guys through kind of what we did after we've done this. So we're going to create a new VLAN. We're going to call this Tower 2 Side A. So if you have various setups where you have maybe two sets of racks blowing into a center hot chamber, you'll have a side A and a side B, or a 1 or a 2, however you want to name the nomenclature on it. But in this case, we're going to say Tower 2 Side A. And then what we're going to do is come down here, and we're going to do an advance here. And we're going to show, actually, where is it? Right here. We're going to change this auto scale here, and we're going to set this right now to 26. And what that does is it gives me 61 usable IPs. Okay, so if I have a rack that can only put 24 machines on there, I don't need really any more than 61 IPs. You don't want to line it up perfectly where it's like I have 24 and I want to only have 24 usable IPs, because sometimes you unplug a machine and you're replacing a machine and you plug it in, and if you're out of IPs because there's a reservation to that machine, essentially, let me just break this down real quick for you guys. If you have, it's just like when you plug in a device, it looks at a couple things. It looks at what the MAC address of that device is, and then it will assign an IP, and it keeps a registry of this. Think of it like it's a card catalog type of setup in a library. I'm going back in the past here. And let's say you're using a machine and you restart it. Certain machines like Canons will rotate their MAC address. So they have a range of MAC addresses. So as far as the world's concerned in the networking side, it thinks it's a new machine. So you can very quickly run out of IPs, like in a VLAN if you have it set too low. So if you, let's say you have a rack and there's only 8 machines on there, you could do a smaller subset, maybe 30 IP range, even though you're only going to have 8 machines on there. But what you don't want to do is have huge ranges. There's no sense in it. You're going to have things all over the place from a amount of IPs. So setting it to like a 61 is a good thing. And then you can have, some control on how many IPs are out there and how to trace down some stuff. We'll go back to this laptop here. So setting that to usable, just by this hitting this net mask drop down, it's giving you kind of a range, and then it's going to tag this VLAN ID. It's just a unique identifier for that particular VLAN. And then there's some pretty cool tricks here. If you go into manual here, that you can actually go in and change the amount of IPs. You can reduce this down to make some changes. So you can come in here and manually change this, let's say to 31. Okay, now here's a cool trick. So it's going to give you 30 here. So let's say you're out of a shelf, you have 8 machines on there, you have 30 usable IPs, but we've given it a net mask range of 26. So in theory, we have 62 IPs. What this is going to do is these 30 IPs are going to fall within this range. So your IPs are going to be from .2 to 31, and then anything from 32 to 63, to 63, because that's going to be your top. You can statically assign under this VLAN, meaning 192.168.5.33. If you want to anchor like an IoT device, let's say in that VLAN range, but you don't ever want it to get assigned. So you're bringing the scope out, but then you're locking the amount of IPs that you have to a smaller subset. And then you still have within that VLAN usable static IPs that you can use for other things. It's just kind of a cool little network trick thing that you can do inside Ubiquiti's OS. And it works very, very well for that kind of stuff. I haven't seen a question here. We will get to questions here. 5,000 plus clients, ideal for larger sites. Yes, you can absolutely do that. There's different. We'll have one of these live streams for a much larger site. This one's really targeted for around 400 to 1,000, 1,200 machines at max with a Dream Machine Pro. If you get a Pro Max Dream Machine, you can get a little more clients from that. It has a little more beefier. It's about 2 times the performance. You're going to want the enterprise class, like what we had out in North Carolina, which was it's a much larger setup. It's the enterprise class client with the mission critical, and then having a couple of the enterprise fortress gateways. So we had 2 of those in redundancy. So we had a fortress gateway and then the enterprise class router for a much larger 6,000 setup. So your 6,000 plus client setup, you're going to want some more beefier hardware there, just because you're just going to get some network saturation and it's not ideal. So let's move this back over to the laptop here real quick and take you guys through this. So that's how you kind of range your IP ranges. And then we're going to add this one, right? So now you can see this is another one that's a range here. And what you're seeing every time that we do this is we're bumping the subnet mask, right? So this is how you're going to breach the 256 of like when people are like, I've hit 200 plus addresses and my router goes crazy. Well, it's because you're only on one subnet mask octet, and you need really to expand that to new subnets. That's what the VLAN manager is providing to you. Now you can see here I put a public Wi-Fi. Well, I'm going to just go in here. We're going to delete this and I'll come back to it just to let you kind of see how this works here. We're going to come in here and just remove this guy here. Let me go back. Networks. We're going to manage this. We're going to get rid of this one here. Remove public network. Confirm. And we're going to come in here and create a separate network for here, hit done here. This gives us back this. We're going to create a new virtual LAN. We're going to call this public Wi-Fi. We can leave that on auto scale. That's fine. You could you're just going to create issues if you give it too less of IPs. So, 249 IPs are fine in that particular IP range. And then you could come into your Wi-Fi here, and you can see I already have a base network set up. It's set up under the base network default ID, but we would just come in here. Oh, it hasn't applied it yet, my dudes. Let's go back into networks here. Make sure it's applying. It has to publish it to where I can get into it here. And you'll see it pop up here. Here we go. There we go. Public Wi-Fi, and apply changes. And what that's going to do is now I know the network VLAN segmentation for the public addresses, and then I can create a separate, privileged Wi-Fi network under here where I could have another, like, let's say not public Wi-Fi, and then really give a different set of parameters. And so when you're in this Wi-Fi thing here, so there's a network segmentation. That's what's under networks. And then when I go up to Wi-Fi here, this is the advanced features within that network segmentation. So if people are wondering why there's some duplicity there, like, well, what's the difference? Well, if I go into manual here, I may well only have this as a hotspot portal, which is going to apply certain aspects to this where I could do some charging maybe of the environment where I can charge people for it. I could limit the Wi-Fi speed not to saturate the network. If I have a public, I'd put this in here and just say, hey, I want this to. You can create a profile on the speed to say, hey, because I'm getting, let's say, 500 meg up and down, I only put 25 meg on that. That just gives you the ability to kind of control that kind of aspect. So I just wanted to give you kind of an idea of why you'd want to have different Wi-Fi networks in there. You can kind of control this. You can create some isolation. So there is a question on there. How do you create the VLANs where they don't talk to each other? You could create network isolation between those, where they won't cross-talk to each other. Naturally, you're not going to run into any kind of like IP conflicts or anything between the VLANs, because they are on separate subnet mask here. Separate subnets rather, not subnet mask. So different subnets right here. So there's 2, there's 3, all this. But if you get into this manual piece here, you can start to see how to kind of manage some of those aspects here. And see, where you want to leave certain things off. You can add network boost here, which just provides a little extra for it. The lease time, all those sorts of things. You can make some changes in there in each of your VLANs and control that in that aspect. The same thing from the internet side. You can see the if you had multiple sources here, we right now LAN 2, I could have it set up at port 4 in this particular machine, and then it would give me, and port 4 would be my secondary. So primary is coming into the switch there, and port 4 would be my failover here, as an example. So that gives you some control there. And then once you have a second internet set up in there, you could do that failover option. That is one of the drop downs in there, and then give you that option there. Again, from just a navigation standpoint, and looking at some of the segmentation stuff too. If we come in here and click. Let's say, I'm going to set this scenario and what the relevance of why I'm going to tell you guys what I'm about to change. If you have a situation where your network's acting super slow and you have several switches on there, like several managed switches, and you're on maybe an aggregator on the control of your switches, so now you have multiple, like, let's say 10 gig connections, but you're still getting terrible saturation, it's probably because of your priority setup. We had this out there in North Carolina where we were getting machines dropping. We had a couple switches kick off, and we were like, what's going on here? Our pro aggregator, the enterprise aggregator, we're 25 gig to each of our core switches, right? Which was, we're not InfiniBand there, but like that's a pretty heavy duty network layout, with 25 gig to each core switch, and then to each, gigabit to each of the Bitcoin miners, which, I mean, mind you, they're using like 16 KB per transaction. So there's hardly any network traffic, just a lot of saturation. Well, that saturation and IP grabbing whenever you're starting to reboot a whole setup, like if you have to reboot the whole farm, you end up getting a ton of saturation as there's things are starting to come back up because they're all trying to fetch an IP, and you have like 6,000 plus machines. You need to have network segmentation adjusted on here. So I'm going to get in here and show you guys kind of what that looks like. So that's back to the whiteboard. Let's go back to the laptop. Your network segmentation piece in here comes down to the advanced properties here. So if you come in here and you're looking at this switch, and let's just say we call this tower 1 switch, and imagine we had 8 more of these switches. You would come into here and you need to go in and you need to make a change. Actually, it's not under this particular spot here. I need to go back in my port management. And bring up my segmentation. 1 second, my dudes. .24 port switch. My priority. Actually not seeing it right now. And it might be because I don't have multiple 24 port switches in here. So there is a drop down on these switches typically. And it could be because I only have 1 in here plugged in. Oh, no, it is. I have to uncheck this global switch setting here. So under advanced, there it is. This priority, the default on this, on all of your guys' Ubiquiti switches, is this setting right here. And if you have every one of these set to 32,000 and you go to reboot that network, when you start getting into several thousand machines trying to hit this, you're going to get into a lot of slow traffic issues. And the way you want to do this is you start on that first switch. You just need to have control of it. So name them 1 through 8 or however many you have, and you need to start one of them at 0. And then the next one you're going to set at 4096. And then the next switch you're going to set at 8192. You are setting a priority for each switch, and you're going to have a whole different world of experience on your network layer. Like of just your performance is going to go up tremendously, and you're not going to have a lot of issues with lag or your router having all kinds of issues. You need to have those set up if you have lots and lots and lots of clients. And I haven't seen much of an impact if you have like less than a couple hundred clients, but like if you have multiple clients, multiple switches in a larger array, you definitely want to have that set up from a 0 on up for each switch and just set their priority. And you could even add it to the name, if you're like, tower 1 primary switch, 8290 or 8192, next one, 16,000 and some change, right? Whatever the priority setup is, you can kind of give yourself a mental cue of which priority is set to each switch. And I mean, what I'm telling you right now is absolute gold, because Todd and I fought with this for more than a week of trying to figure this out once we started getting, thousands of clients on a much larger network. Mind you, beating our head of like, why is this 25 gig backend with enterprise core and, enterprise fortress gateways with redundancy? Why are we threading the CPUs? Why is it killing these machines, right? And it all came back down to the priority. So it's a critical requirement. And then have your priorities set up in a way where you're not just threading everything at the same priority. It's a critical piece to it. But I mean, this is really kind of the basic setup, my dudes. And we've had a ton of success. That's why you see whenever you're when you guys watch our videos and stuff, you'll see us using Ubiquiti equipment is because we've gotten really decent at going and configuring them, and just the telemetry to be able to go from one site to another quickly in the app and, restart something that needs to be restarted. Being able to have absolute power control on each of the main components is a critical piece there. Again, in the description below, we have the links to these items. If you don't have it at home, and my basic home setup is the same kind of setup as a Dream Machine. I don't have an aggregator, no point to it yet. Maybe at some point, if I end up going 10 gig to all the computers in my basement type of thing, I'll end up going to that, to the switch. But really, the realistic, 10 gig is great, but like the 2.5 is the kind of new hotness. But it all comes back down as your internet here is that, if you're only, let's say you have gig internet, until you start having 2.5 gig, to your internet, you're not going to see a big advantage to the internet, but to the local machines, it's great if you're transferring stuff between machines. 2.5 and 10 gig is fantastic. But you need, this guy still here really you want to have, and that, the Dream Machine Pro Max is 2.5 gig, natively, and that's pretty nice too. So, well, let's take some questions, my dudes. We're at 50 minutes. I want to try to keep this to an hour, so let's do 10 minutes of Q&A, my dudes. If we have any questions on this. And it's good to be back. I hope you guys are being able to hear me. This is a setup. Spent some time today to make sure the whiteboard and everything was working. Hopefully this has been good. Use static addresses, my dudes. Well, not on 6,000 machines. That's a pain in the what. On smaller setup, you could use statics. But here's my experience with statics on Bitcoin mining. You have control boards, you have things that happen, and then you're resetting them. And if you don't have absolute control of like what that machine previously was, maybe have it taped on there or something, and you have just a worker or somebody that's coming in, maybe you have like a larger project, you bring in out of town help. Everybody's got to have that same understanding that if you go in there and reset that device, for whatever reason, that it gets that new static IP. Otherwise, you're back into that cycle. That's why I like controlling everything on VLANs to a port, because I know at least that no matter where they put that machine at, because it's being controlled through a VLAN, I know that it's being picked up in the right place. I don't have to go find it. I know that, in this case, normally we would set up not 192.168. We would set up 10.100.12345 on each of that third octet, and then I know if they take any machine and plug it into that spot, I know that it's in that VLAN, so I know exactly where that machine's at. That's why you would do this in the VLAN. I didn't say that during the beginning. Like people are like, why would you do all this stuff with VLANs and stuff? It literally gives you an idea of where things are at, no matter if you just randomly plug it in. Berkeley. Oh, Endless Mining dropped a little $4.99 super chat. Thank you, my dude. Yeah, we'll do a multi-stream on the next one. I need to get a few things configured to make that work, and then you guys can see this. Do we use site-to-site VPNs? Yes. We can do a whole little segment on site-to-site VPNs to get direct access into the site safely and securely. It's good to see you too, Hawk Crypto. Cool, my dudes. Yeah, we got a lot of questions. I mean, this is a pretty bland topic. It is, networking, but wanted to make sure that there was a good set of content for you guys. If you're setting up some sites, how to get in there, update some stuff, see how it all comes into the fold. While we're waiting for a few questions, I'm going to come in here and just show you guys how quick and easy it is to update something. So we can come in here. I know that one of these devices here, let's go here, was showing an update. So you kind of see the status here. We're going to click to update here. Let this guy update. King had a couple questions. Does hash rate proxies help a little bit? So if you're having any, I would not mess with any of that unless you are seeing a lot of, share issues to the pool. With having, 4,000+ clients up there, our stell or orphan counts were still well within the same that I would have at my house. We did not see a lot of issues with like the work traffic on Stratum. And so like what that basic question is for everybody from a context standpoint is all Bitcoin miners on the planet are working on the same problem at the exact same time. And it's essentially a number line problem. If you've never seen this kind of depiction of it, but essentially all Bitcoin miners have a number problem or number line problem. And the pool will issue out a series of work. So let's say all your miners are working on this range of numbers here, and they're submitting and they're uploading the proof of work in a package and its amount of shares. Did they ask you to, how much work did you do? And it's a share count. If you have buckets of work and let's say you're at like 8% of that is stale or you're not getting it, something's happening. Like you're not being able to submit your proof of work back, or it's colliding. Something's happening to where it's not working. As you want to have this, sub 2-3% if you can. So all these different work shares that are happening that all these miners are doing is just work packages. And at some point, somebody gets a work package that's the answer somewhere in here. So it's doing its proof of work. And you're like, hey, I found it. And you broadcast that just out to the world. Like, I found it. Let's go. Now that's effectively what's happening in that moment in time, in that millisecond, is you're in something called a race condition. You are racing against the rest of the world to make sure that your answer and the proof of work with that has propagated around and gets enough consensus that you are the solution. And you do get into situations where you found it and you broadcast it, and within the same few milliseconds, somebody else does it, or right on the same time, and they will get the win essentially. And even though you have the right answer, you didn't get the proof of it, or you didn't get the acknowledgement of it, right? It's orphaned. It's like, that work's old. Sorry. Doesn't matter that you had the right answer. Now, back in Ethereum mining back in the day, you would get rewarded for that, right? You could get the orphan. If you got the orphan, you got paid 5 coins plus 2 at the time, which was fantastic. It was like a holiday. It's like, oh my God, I got more for what I did. But the proxies and all that kind of stuff in a nutshell, is to streamline this activity to a point that you're centralizing kind of that get work process or through Stratum, and you're getting the chunks and you're working on it and you're submitting it as larger payloads back up to the pool. So you're trying to get rid of the chatter out the internet. If you have a really slow internet connection, proxies help well. I've seen it out in certain climates, or not climates, but like depictions where you're in like low, like 3G, 4G connections on some of these austere locations where you just can't have that network saturation from all the machines reaching out for work. You'll proxy that to get it more compartmentalized, for then it can go to each of the machines and not have to go out there, each of them go out there and get it. So hopefully that answers the question. Like on most typical traffic with a decent internet, you don't. We haven't found it even all the way up to 6,000+ machines. As long as again, we were on fiber in that, which we had 1.25 gig up and down with a very low millisecond connection to the source. So it worked fine on that. Nice. John English Tech. Thanks, buddy. As a Ubiquiti guy myself, I appreciate the thoroughness of this topic. We've been in it for a minute, my dudes. So like what we try to get out there is like, if you go to bitsbetrippin.io, this is what we've been doing. People are wondering like, where the heck is Carter at? Where haven't I been putting a lot of content out? We've been doing a lot of building and consulting with people and helping mines and farms around the world get set up. And a lot of it comes back to doing stuff like this. So sometimes it's a phone call, it's a couple hours, quick consultation. We remote in, we fix it, we help you get it set up. And then sometimes it's a full on like, hey guys, can you guys fly out? We send Todd and some of the team out, and we'll do this whole thing. And we cradle to grave on one of these things. There's a couple days at max for us to completely rip out what you got in, put all new stuff in, and get it all configured and working, get everybody logged into it, get all the cameras and stuff set up. So that's what we've really been doing pretty heavily in the industry right now with folks. And so I just feel like this is kind of the recipe and ingredient, and I'm trying to teach you guys how to cook too with it. And again, there's many ways to do this. It's not the way, it's a way. So I'm not telling you this is the de facto requirement or what you need to do. I'm just giving you guys our successes with it and some of the tweaks that we've been able to find to figure out how to make it more optimal. And relatively low cost stuff. I mean, a whole stack like this, I mean, you can get a little nuts on the camera side. I mean, some of those cameras can get expensive. These new AI cameras here, which actually like not just draw the box, but they're way better at predicting what they're looking at. You know, if it's cat, dog, person, car, zooming in on the license plate, all that kind of stuff. You get a lot of those new cool features with it. And then the Protect app is real strong. The alert notification side is really good. The auto emails, SMTP stuff, if you want text messages, all that stuff's real clean. And then just from like the ease of use on the redundant internet side here, where you have multiple internets, and just out of the box on the $300 piece of equipment, you have like effectively a load balancer on the internet side built in. It's got a built-in load balancer, so you can have it split the signal across both networks, or you can have it fell over. And just having that as a one-click option inside the OS is fantastic. The Mining King, has your Fortress been able to handle the high client load? Yes, absolutely. It handles it with a charm. Like it's a 5 on that particular setup. I've it designed for 6,000 clients, but it'll do 10,000 plus. That enterprise level stuff that they have, that Fortress Gateway. I don't have the link to it down there, but we can get you a separate video or some help with getting that set up. We set up in redundant setup. So when you're dealing with that kind of level of clients and communication, you want to have like the enterprise class, routing, and then you put a couple of the Fortress gateways in like a failover mode where you can have them as redundant, and then you go into your aggregator, and your aggregators go into each of your switches, from a SFP plus, 10 gig to 25 gig, core setup. And you're going to be, as long as your priorities and stuff are set up, it's going to run silky smooth. How much do you typically charge for a setup like this, not including the hardware? So like we'll do a setup like this, hardware wise, like the base setup of something like this is probably $5,500. And then for us, depending where we got to go, it could be anywhere from $2,500 to $3,800. And that's like because of travel. But it's usually a pretty quick, easy setup. So all in probably under 10K. That's with equipment. It depends how deep you go on like something like these cameras and stuff. They can get pretty expensive. And again, like I said, if you keep it pretty lean, where you're just doing let's say you're doing 2 containers, and you're at like just 2 of the 24 port switches, maybe 1 Wi-Fi adapter, a handful of the cameras. I mean, you can click the links below just to look and see what the prices are and kind of build out a spreadsheet of that. But I mean, hardware wise, I mean, you're maybe looking anywhere from $2,000, maybe $3,000, because some of these cameras are, $400, $500. And now you can use other cameras. I like the Ubiquiti cameras just because like the quality and the fact that when some of these sites, we've had them running now for 24 months. We have the big pan tilt zoom camera on one of the sites. and it's fantastic. It's still sharp, clear, it works. The weathering, it's went through 2 winters, very cold. It's went through summers, very hot. The quality of the hardware is fantastic. I've had other setups that were cheaper, and like the cameras, they got water in them, the lens, they're not high quality pieces of equipment. You get what you pay for on certain components, especially like the cameras and stuff. And Ubiquiti's got fantastic camera setups. Like we've had really good. I know there's better, but like they're getting up there. Like on their higher end camera setup, they're up there with some of the best out there. You can actually have now like zoom lenses, all PTZ, the pen tilt zoom stuff. It's fantastic. On like the hardware standpoint, like the mission critical is the one thing I didn't have in this list here, which typically we'll put in there, is a battery backup. There is a battery backup stand up. I do have it down in the description also. That is about a little bigger than this size here, but it's just it's the same 2U setup. It's just got a little link to it on the back because it's a battery. Holds the whole setup there for about an hour if you're just like in the current power usage of this feed and setup here, which the main piece is it keeps your cameras up with the sites down. Like if you lose power to the site, you're still up. You still have all your cameras. You still have your internet up because you're distributing it through this. It's all managed and controlled. That's being powered by the battery backup. You still have all your cameras, your Starlink still operating, and the site could be dark, right? That's another critical piece for that. All right, my dudes. Hopefully this was good and fun, and it's a start of many things that we're doing from an infrastructure kind of walkthrough with you guys. Today was Ubiquiti, and we're looking at doing some more of like infrastructure setup. We're going to do one on power systems, switch gear, that sort of thing, coming up too, on just some of the lessons learned on implementation, some of the things that we found, from a grid tie versus, existential situation from a power standpoint, to ground grids, to how to bond, just the examples of what we've went through. So we're not certified electricians, but what I want to bring to you guys is what the results of some of the sites that we've had. So we're going to be talking from the capacity of implementation, and not, like, hey, this is the way to do it or not. It's just like, this is what happened, and then give you guys some backstories on how some of that stuff came through. Awesome, my dudes. It's been good. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Stay tuned.